almost every children's literature award there is, including the Newbery Medal, the Margaret A. Edwards Award, the Scott Odell Award, and the Edgar. He's twice been nominated for a National Book Award and was the first children's author ever to have been awarded a National Humanities Medal. Originally from Decatur, Illinois, he taught junior high English before devoting himself full-time to writing, which was probably bad for his students, but wonderful for the rest of us. His book, Don't Look and It Won't Hurt, was made into the movie Gas, Food, Lodging. His new book is The Mouse with the Question Mark Tail, published by Penguin. And given that he travels nearly constantly speaking to groups like this and spending part of every year in London, we're very lucky that he's landed here to speak with us today. Please welcome Richard Peck.
Good afternoon, readers of all ages. People are always asking writers how we get our ideas. It's the most popular question because it doesn't require the reading of a line you ever wrote. I will tell you how we get our ideas. My sister said to me, "I want to see the dress." "What dress?" I said. And she said, "The dress Kate Middleton wore when she became the Duchess of Cambridge by marrying Prince William." I said, "Where is it?" She said, "It's on display in the throne room of Buckingham Palace in London." I said, "Oh, do you want to go?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I'll take you. Don't you wish you had me for a brother?" Besides, I'll go anywhere for a new setting. So off we went. And while we were waiting to go in, we went to the Mews, the Royal Mews, my favorite place. And while my sister was photographing the horses, I looked down and a mouse ran over my shoe. And I thought, you live here. You are a mouse of the Royal Mews. And I wondered what his story was. And that's all it takes. And usually my story ideas appear miles from where I live. And so they did. Is the geography of story. And I am a writer because of that great moment that happened every month of my childhood, when through the mail from distant Washington, D.C. came a copy of the National Geographic magazine. And inside a map fell out, beckoning to the world. That did it. My favorite setting in London is the Royal Mews, where my sister and I were waiting to see the dress. It's where the coronation coach has waited for more than 60 years now for its next moment in the sun. It's where the royal steeds are stabled and the royal limousines garaged, and it smells exactly right. And a story has to smell right. It smells of liniment and leather and brasso and horse, and what horses leave behind. And so, I had my setting, I just had to get a story to go with it. But more of that in a moment. Writers need 3 lives. We need a whole lifetime to sit at home in the empty room, trying to hear voices. And then we have, but it isn't enough to create your masterpiece. You have to go out and market your masterpiece, because my readers don't read reviews. Then you need a 3rd life altogether to find the next story, because it's never anywhere near you. So we need 3 lives and have them. And here is the sacred secret of writing. A story is always about something that never happened to the author. Beatrix Potter was never a rabbit. J.K. Rowling did not attend Hogwarts School. And Gary Paulson was never dropped down in the great American wilderness with nothing in his hand but a
hatchet.
No. That great American wilderness is simply his metaphor for middle school. We look for our stories in two places. The library, because nobody but a reader ever became a writer, and we learn how to write from better writers than we are, and we need to know what's being published so we can be published. And then that other place we look is miles and years from our lives, because a story is never the autobiography of the author. It is always the biography of the person the reader would like to be. I'm a writer because I never had a teacher who said, write what you know. If I'd been limited to writing what I know, I would have produced in these 42 years one unpublishable haiku. We don't write what we know. We write what we can find out. And so, a story is about how history repeats in every human heart. My stories bootleg all the history and geography I can get in them for a 21st century readership who have not lived long enough to see history repeating and are not learning any in school. Any in school. Non-elective, sequential history and how it repeats. So, history keeps happening and I have to keep my show on the road because we write from observation, not experience. From research, not recollection. If Ernest Hemingway really had fought all those wars and battles, if he really had climbed all those mountains and caught all those fish, if he really had loved all those women, he wouldn't have had time to write, let alone the need. And so, we are often asked our writing process. I will tell you. I write each book 6 times, because I'm just like a teenager. I never get anything right in the first 5 tries either. And I write on an electric typewriter, because I never lost a young reader to an electric typewriter. And I write from the beginning on as if I'm reading it, not writing it. Page 1, chapter 1, first line. And I back and fill, and when I can no longer read the page because I've made so many corrections, I retype it. And when I retype it, I find 4 more things to change. And then when I get a page exactly the way I want it, I take out 20 words. You can get 20 words out of the tightest page you ever wrote, and should. When you're young, you say, how long does it have to be? When you're old, you say, how short can I make it? So, I back and fill. I don't outline, because that would give me too much authority. If by page 40 the characters aren't coming up with ideas I would never have thought of, I have to get rid of them and start new. I wrote my first novel from 3 different viewpoints before I got the right one. So I learned early the value of throwing out most of what you write. And then I come to the end, and it's a year later. I don't know why that is. It is. It's just a year later. And when I finish it and know how it ended, I take the first chapter, and without rereading it, I throw it away. Then I write the first chapter that really goes with this book now that I know how it ends. All the clues are in now because I know what they are. And the first chapter is the last chapter in disguise. So that's how I do it, times 42. And they don't get easier, no. In the first book, I never stopped to say, have I written this before? We writers, asked how we got our starts. We are asked so often we have to think of something. I write fiction because I was of a generation who learned a lot of history and geography. We had to. We weren't gifted. We had to study. And history gives you story, and geography gives you somewhere to put it. I marched into kindergarten on the day Hitler marched into Poland. But I was better prepared than he. I'd had a mother who read to me as evening proceeded apace. Light the lamp and turn the page and be any place. Pirates there were and palaces and a raft at the river's bend. I warmed my face at the story's light, hoping it wouldn't end. I had a mother who read to me as the afternoon ebbed away and stories stirred in the darkening wood. And that's why I'm here today. Today we're told there's no time to read to a child in the single-parent family, in the family where both parents work, no schedule for reading in the family where you can text from the dinner table and sleep with your phone. No patience to read to the hyperactive child. I wanted to be hyperactive too, but mother wouldn't let me. And so I wanted to be a writer before I could read. And then when I got to school, because of wartime, every classroom bristled with maps. Everything was map study. And I learned my language from maps. Tokyo, Honolulu, Monte Cassino, Cairo, and then Hiroshima. This vocabulary of danger and long distance and drama. Whereas at the Lincoln Square Theater downtown, the movie playing was called Casablanca. Oh, the world looked so good out there and exciting. And geography mattered from the very beginning for me. But now I write for people who never saw a map in a classroom and who may not know the geography of their own towns. Besides, a map is poetry and a GPS is prose. Most writers will tell you, all writers will tell you, that it was a teacher that got us going, one teacher. And yes, I remember her. It's almost never a college teacher because we get to them too late in our lives, and often in theirs. The teacher who brought me here today was named Mrs. Cole, and she taught fourth grade. She had 42 fourth graders in her class. I counted the heads later in the class picture in a school swollen by World War II. And she never raised her voice, and she seldom stirred from her desk. She didn't have to, because then teachers and parents were on the same side. And even with 42 of us, they still had us outnumbered. And then all on a given day, and I didn't see it coming, Mrs. Cole stepped up behind me with a book in her hand. And that's what teaching is. Stepping up behind a kid you've cut out of the pack with a book in your hand. And she handed it to me and said, "Here, you might try this." Notice the verb, try, not like. Adults were not particularly concerned then what children liked, which made us want to be adults. But try was a kind of challenge, and she handed me the book. It was falling apart. It was crumbling away. So I loved it at once, because I hated anything new, and still do. And I took it home and tried it. It was the story about the two boys on the raft. Down the river of no return, running through a world made wrong. And of course, I fell in love at once with long distance in the past and the language. I ate it up, and it's still on my desk today, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I'm a writer because in fourth grade I could read a 19th century novel cover to cover. Not because I was gifted, but because my teacher feared no parent. I mention another writer's work before my own because nobody but a reader ever became a writer. And we learn from better writers than we are. We need all our role models, whether we're writers or not. And all the best role models are dead. And all the worst role models are a year ahead of you in school. And from Mark Twain, I learned the truth I wouldn't have learned anywhere else, and it gave me a career. From Mark Twain, I learned that humor is anger that was sent to finishing school. I could never be Mark Twain, but I will die trying. And because of the river running through all his works, all of my stories are the stories of journeys. For me, a book, a story, is your ticket out of town. And it's a one-way ticket because we never, ever write about anybody who can move back home after college. Our stories have to end with more hope than that. We, writers of these books, may be the last history teachers left standing. We, the untenured, in our empty rooms, writing real books, not textbooks, writing on eye level, not grade level. There is no such thing as a grade level. And so, I fell in love with the 19th century and with the Civil War, not in history class, but in the pages of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Gone with the Wind, a book that could not be published today, but I read it in freer times, and The Red Badge of Courage. And so, but of course, every book is a historic novel before the ink is dry, especially if your favorite readers are young. And so here comes my newest book. It is something of a companion volume to the one before it, called Secrets at Sea. And since no reviewer has noticed, I'll just tell you that these two novels both end on the same day in history, in the same building, one room apart. Though it doesn't matter in which order you read them. The moment is 1897. And 1897 was the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria. And I wrote it in the Diamond Jubilee of her great-great-granddaughter, 115 years later. Because the story is about how history repeats in every human heart. It's the tale of a young man setting forth on a journey of self-discovery through school and the army, and then on to finding out who he really is, because you can only find out who you are a long way from home. The story is what is called a picaresque, a journey across the world looking for yourself. But in this case, the young man is a mouse. And so this is a rodent picaresque. And the whole civilized world, as far as is known to that mouse, are the precincts of Buckingham Palace. The royal mews, the hidden garden, the palace itself. I share with you the opening of The Mouse with the Question Mark Tail, because our first lines are the most important lines we write. Because if our readers don't like the first line, they'll never see the second. You can only warm up on your reader's time if you're writing for adults. And so, I write every book 6 times, but I will write the opening passage 24 to 50. I never get the first line right the first time. And I found the opening line of this book on page 124 of the 6th draft. But there it was. It was clearly the opening line, so I moved it back to the beginning and rewrote the first part. Here is how it goes. Every time a human walks out of a room, something with more feet walks in. Mice, of course, who are only a whisker away and everywhere you fail to look. It's true of the room where you're sitting. It's truer still of Buckingham Palace. How busy the scampering world of mice within the palace walls, through that mouse hole just behind the throne. How busy the royal mews next door, where the royal carriages are kept, Beneath the clattering cobblestones of the royal mews, a whole private honeycomb of mouse passages crisscross and connect. One of them leads into the palace itself. How busy these royal places always are, where you can see and where you're not allowed. And never busier than on that long ago June day, when Queen Victoria celebrated her Diamond Jubilee, 60 years upon the throne. Remember that great day when all the horses of the royal mews stamped across London in the proud Jubilee parade, and the mice of Buckingham Palace swept out of the walls in a great gray tide across the marble floors. Remember that day because it bears on the story of my life. This novel is a departure for me because of its exotic foreign setting and its upper crust English accent. But I'm too much in love with the rhythms of American speech and American stories not to come scampering back for my next book to native ground. But whether I'll scamper back on 2 feet or 4, I haven't yet decided. In his inaugural address in January, President Obama invoked 3 American stories: Seneca Falls, Selma, Stonewall. 3 American stories, 3 landmarks in our American lives. 3 stories our young people need to know that they do not know and will probably never hear in school for the rest of their careers. And so they must hear those stories and 1,000 more like them from us, the elders, we writers in our empty rooms, trying to make our brains bleed directly onto a blank page in an empty room. And parents and grandparents and teachers and librarians, adults with books in our hands, with pages turning to our readers' futures. Thank you.